Hello, good morning. I'm happy to be with you. My name is Michael Peter Edson. I'm the co-founder and associate director for the newly emerging Museum for the United Nations, UN Live. And it's important to say up front that I'm not a spokesperson for the United Nations. I'm not even a United Nations employee. UN Live is an independent NGO, a startup NGO, close to, but not part of the United Nations. So, take a deep breath and imagine that you are, slides. Imagine that you are living 2,000 years ago. You've been outdoors, walking with your army back and forth across the deserts of Persia for longer than you can remember, fighting one bloody battle after another, burying your dead, and walking on. Then one day you enter the city of Gordium. You are taken to the famous chariot of Gordius, founder of the city, son of King Midas. The chariot is lashed together, tied with a knot so intricate, so strong that no one can untie it. A knot so impossible, so magical that an oracle once declared that it could only be untied by a demigod destined to rule all of Asia. You stand there exhausted, dirty, thirsty. Your mouth is full of dust. You look around at the people gathered around you. For some, you can see in their eyes a calculation happening. Their wheels are turning. They are in their minds, each untying the knot, probing it with their fingers, looking for the loose ends, and breaking the knot free to claim their destiny. They are, as we would say today, working the problem. And some may actually give it a try. But in their hearts, before they even begin, they know that while they may put on a good show of trying, they may entertain each other in the act of untying this impossible knot, they know they will fail, like all who have come before them. That path of half-hearted, happy effort and failure is not for you. You stare at the knot. You are so tired, but you make up your mind, and with a shrug of your shoulders, you step forward, you draw your sword, and you cut the knot in half with a single blow. The crowd falls silent. They're shocked. You are Alexander the Great. You are 23 years old, and you have just cut the famous Gordian knot. And I'm sure in your mind's eye, it looked exactly like this painting of the act. That's exactly how I picture it in my mind. I'm kidding, of course. But cutting the Gordian knot is, of course, a metaphor. It's a metaphor for solving difficult problems through direct and decisive action. It's a metaphor we think about every day as we are creating a new global museum, the Museum for the United Nations, UN Live. We are all about action, doers and doing, cutting the knot, not with recklessness or haste, hubris or ego, but by trying to find a direct approach whenever possible to connect problems with the people and action most likely to solve them. Because we face now on Earth some very difficult problems that would seem to require direct and decisive action. And likely they will require unconventional action by millions or billions of people currently not deeply involved in the acting, in the problem solving. I'm thinking specifically about the Sustainable Development Goals, these 17 global goals to be achieved by the year 2030, almost 10 years away. These goals, no poverty, zero hunger, gender equality, climate action, represent knots that we humans have tied for ourselves. These knots affect all of us. They will bind our lives to either happiness or sorrow, and it may take all of us working together to break them. But how can we get all of us working together, taking action on these things that matter so dearly? After almost 30 years of working in museums, I think that for the most part, we in the museum field have a pretty big sword in our hands that we could use to attack these problems. We have institutions with their stamina and force. We have in many parts of the world reputation, trust, physical infrastructure, networks, and convening power. And we have, most importantly, the ability to use a broad spectrum of techniques, media, and platforms through which we can invite the world to work together. Music, visual arts, poetry, literature, exhibition, performance, the spoken word, the world of intellect, emotion, dialogue, and doing, making, know-how, and community. These aren't words and grammars that we usually use in the world of international development. And that's part of the power of the concept of the Museum for the United Nations. Museums and cultural institutions can, with and from their communities, speak and act in this powerful vocabulary, which is the grammar of our very lives. But museums have these tools within reach. And I do want to acknowledge that we know that museums are not universally loved. We've thought about that a lot. And that indeed is the subject for another talk about our strategy. But we do have these tools within reach, these swords, but we seem to be afraid to use them. We prefer instead to play a safe, cautious, and indirect role in solving the problems that matter most. And I would argue that time has run out to play only the safe and cautious game. I think that museums in this day and age are held back by three major defects in our thinking and our practice. The first defect is that we are too cautious. Trust to us is something to have and accumulate, but not to spend. In the aftermath of America's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord in 2017, I could not find a single museum that took clear action or asked their communities to become involved. A couple of museum directors wrote blog posts buried deep in their websites that vowed weekly to continue their missions of documenting and preserving nature's wonders. This was one specific blog post from a natural history museum director. They vowed to continue their mission of documenting and preserving nature's wonders. That same director, in an April 2019 article titled "How Museums Are Responding to an Era of Alternative Facts," said, when speaking about metaphorically people who believe in alternative facts, believe that 2 + 2 = 5, he said, the moment that you do that, the moment you call them out on those lies, you fall into the partisan divide. We have this huge obligation because the public trusts us. We've got to really be careful to maintain that trust. But to me, You earn trust so that you can spend it on things that matter, like taking a strong stand for the truth. Do you know what platforms were active, vocal, and energetic in the days after America's withdrawal from the Paris Accord? Here they are on the top row of this mosaic. Teen Vogue magazine and the Weather Channel. Below them are the websites of the American Museum of Natural History and the Natural History Museum in London. Mummies, sensational butterflies. It feels like they're living in a different world. The second flaw is that we overestimate the importance of indirect paths to action. And at an event in Copenhagen in June 2017 titled "The Role of Museums in a World on Fire," the directors of 4 cultural institutions, including the Tate Modern and the National Gallery of Denmark, universally stated their agreement that we are in a world on fire and that their institutions were rising to the task. But none could state a direct and plausible cause and effect relationship between their programs and exhibitions and outcomes that could realistically address or ameliorate problems such as the rise of extremism, inequality, mass migration, or climate change. Frances Morris, director of the Tate Modern, stated that her institution was being truly activist by having galleries full of artists from many places across the world and having a level of diversity in relation to gender and race and ethnicity and age. These are not bad things. Quite the contrary. We need many times more of these things in society, but they presume that the forces and actors outside of the institution will somehow take the enlightenment and good example being shown at our leading institutions and somehow convert them into social innovation significant enough to move the dial on enormous societal issues, Gordian knots, like the SDGs. Many institutions make this leap of faith that someone else will complete their mission. But stories of this happening are extremely rare, extremely hard to find. The third and final defect in our practice that I want to talk about this morning is that we are too slow. Winning slowly is the same as losing, is the title of environmentalist Bill McKibben's 2017 article about climate change in Rolling Stone magazine. It begins, if we don't win very quickly on climate change, then we will never win. That's the core truth about global warming. It's what makes it different from every other problem our political systems have faced. I'm also thinking about Stefan Zweig's The World of Yesterday, written in 1941 as the world was descending into madness. George Pronchek wrote in The New Yorker, the excruciating power of Zweig's memoir lies in the pain of looking back and seeing that there was a small window in which it was possible to act, and then discovering how suddenly and irrevocably that window can be slammed shut. The United Nations just reported that we have 11 years to take decisive action on the climate crisis, or we will face catastrophic permanent consequences. In climate, civics, extremism, poverty, health, and many other burning issues, there is indeed a small window in which it is possible to act. And this window requires us to move directly to outcomes that matter and not meander around hoping that someone else will complete our missions. Finally, just a word or two about UN Live, the Museum for the United Nations, UN Live. And my wonderful colleague, Nikolai Moeller, is in the audience now. He'll speak in the next session. And I encourage you to make friends with him and learn from him and share with him your own work. He's a wonderful, brilliant guy. I'm a little over time, so I'll keep it very short. I encourage you to look at our some talks that I've given recently about the architecture and structure and founding of the museum. And I encourage you to look at our website, at the content strategy and other documents that speak about our theory of change. I think I'll skip ahead to the very end. And I'm maybe not, I might be the first, but I'm probably not the last person in this conference who will quote Greta Thunberg, a wonderful Swedish young person who's been pointing the way for a lot of us in this room, I'm sure. Greta said at the Davos conference in 2019, "We are at a time in history where everyone with any insight of the climate crisis that threatens our civilization and the entire biosphere must speak out in clear language, no matter how uncomfortable and unprofitable that may be." I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day, and then I want you to act. And everything we are doing as a young startup institution is animated by these words and this urgency. We want to cut the knot in museums of passivity, caution, and inaction. And I thank you.